Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Saul, and I'm joined today by Justin Gary. Justin is the designer and creator of Solforge Fusion. Solforge Fusion is a hybrid deck game from the creators of Magic the Gathering and Ascension deck building game. And Justin has been in this gaming industry for a very long time, and I'll kind of let him add some context there. Justin, how's it going, and what's kind of your background in gaming?
Yeah, it's going great. It's great to be here. My background is gaming. I basically have been a gamer my entire life. I have been making a living from games for over 25 years now. Starting off as the youngest ever Magic U.S. national champion, going on to win Pro Tour and World
Wow.
Championships. So they're kind of just thrown into the deep end. Then for some reason I decided to go to law school, which was a terrible idea. But then after that, came back to gaming as a designer. Worked on Marvel and DC trading card games, the World of Warcraft trading card game, World of Warcraft miniatures game. Started my own company, Stoneblade Entertainment, 14 years ago when I launched the Ascension deck building game. Then started working with Richard Garfield, the guy that created Magic the Gathering, to work on first the original version of Solforge, which was one of the first, actually the first native mobile TCG to exist before things like Magic Arena and Hearthstone. And now bringing it back in its new form of Solforge Fusion as the world's first hybrid deck game that lives in tabletop, Web 2, and now on Web 3.
Very cool. I didn't realize you had a side quest there in the world of law, but it looks like you've come back to the light side, huh?
Yeah. That was definitely one of those things. And, this is actually, so now I teach creativity and design. I work with the Wharton School of Business to teach creativity. I have a book on Think Like a Game Designer, my own podcast, Think Like a Game Designer. And honestly, for whoever's listening, like it's one of the core messages I want to deliver, which is, following your passion is not an optional thing in life. Like it is so critical. The society tells us all of these different ways that we should be chasing money and chasing these, standards of success. And the best decision I ever made, which felt like the hardest one at the time. I mean, both my parents were lawyers. Like I was always destined to be a lawyer. But leaving that path felt very painful, but it was the best decision that I had ever made. And that pushing through the challenges that are inevitable in life and inevitable in your career is so much more rewarding when it's something you actually are passionate about. So finding that passion in your life is so critical.
Amazing. Maybe that's something we'll get into later on in this interview, because I think it's a message that resonates with a lot of people. To kick things off, well, actually, before we even talk about Soulforge, I'm just curious. You mentioned you've been playing games for a long time. Trading cards are one category, right? But what about, like, what are your favorite games growing up? What did you kind of resonate with, or what's left a big impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm part of the original Nintendo generation, right? So, getting hooked on games like Zelda and Super Mario and Final Fantasy and those kinds of things had a huge impact on me. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of had my nerdy group. It's one of those things. I found my core relationships. I bonded with my family over games of Monopoly. I bonded with my early friends playing things like Dungeons and Dragons. And then I made friendships all around the world playing Magic. I mean, again, just to paint the picture, right? 17 years old, now all of a sudden I'm traveling to tournaments in Sydney and Rome and Tokyo, and and the experience and the travel of it was amazing, but really it was the friendships and the connections. I would see these friends in different places every couple months. And those are friendships, again, we're talking about 25 years ago. There are many of those friendships have survived to today. And so the games, well, the thing I've realized is that a great game is the excuse for bringing everybody together. It's a fun, it's an engaging experience, but it's the connections that really matter, right? It's the social relationships, the community that you build that really changes something from being a fun pastime into a part of your identity and a part of who you become and over time.
Gotcha. And then what about the category of trading card games? How would you describe that? Because I don't think a lot of people are super familiar with this, but obviously that's kind of the arena that Soulforge operates in.
Yeah, and it's evolving that arena too. So we have to talk about it. But in general, the idea of a trading card game is that instead of a traditional game, right, a traditional card game, let's say I play a game like Uno, I buy a box and what's in the box is the same for everybody, and we play with the same set of cards that's in the box. And a trading card game takes the concept of traditional trading cards like baseball cards and old collectibles, and so every time I open up a pack, I'm going to get a different set of cards than you until I could collect an entire set of those cards. And then I play with my collection, that I build a deck out of the cards that I've collected, and you play out of your collection with the cards that you've collected, and that gives us a far greater variety of experiences. And so as new cards get released, the types of games you can play change. So you have the same basic rules of a game that we're playing, but because the cards themselves break the rules all the time and change the rules all the time, the game is constantly evolving. And so in many ways, it's the way I like to describe a traditional trading card game like Magic the Gathering is imagine that you had a combination of chess and poker, but you get to decide which of the pieces you start on the playing field, which deck cards are going to be in your deck, right? And so that changes the game pretty dramatically.
So let's dig into this a bit, because with trading cards, what often happens is that there's a lot more structure in terms of how you can kind of play the game. There's rules, and then to the point you're making, I guess like the meta, so to speak, or the winning strategy can change over time as new cards get released, or maybe old cards get deprecated or restricted from into use in tournaments. So do you feel like because there's so much more, I guess, rigidity with just the base unit being a trading card, it's in some ways easier to bring people on, or is it more just about establishing kind of like one way of doing things, one way of competing? I guess what is like why have trading cards made their way to into the digital world?
Yeah. So okay, there's a lot to unpack here, right? So one, there's a depth of experience and space to explore, which is meaningful, right? So if once I've played Monopoly a million times, right? I know Monopoly, I know everything. I've seen every scenario that can come up. I've seen every card that can come up. I'm not getting any new experiences out of a game of Monopoly, right? But in a game like Magic or Solforge Fusion or, any of these trading card games, there's so much space to explore. Even if you just created a fixed permutation of, say, a couple thousand cards, there's so much space to explore. But then as new cards are released constantly, there's even more space to explore. And so there's a depth of exploration that keeps people engaged and hooked. And the business model matters too, right? Like in a game of Monopoly, once I've sold you a game of Monopoly, I probably am not selling you another one, right? And so the business to support the content creation and tournaments and engagement and building into constant live operations like you would with a digital game, right? Takes work. And Monopoly is an interesting example because they've found ways to do this with like variants like Monopoly Go, but most games don't have that. Whereas a trading card game, you're constantly creating new content and selling new content, which creates a business model for the creator that can support doing things like, having tournament circuits and having live operations and having lots of cool new fun things for the players. And so, as a, gamer first, but game designer second, CEO and business owner third, I can, from the perspective of all of those things, trading card games open up this door in a way that's really interesting and allows for a deeper experience for everybody. And it's particularly useful, when we start talking about Web3, right? It's so much more natural, right? A lot of games, they try to shoehorn NFTs and tokens into them, whereas a trading card game, by default, the players already understand, like, I have a game object I own, I can trade, I can sell. That's exactly how trading card games have worked for the last 30 plus years. Of course, it makes sense that I can own and trade and sell my digital objects. And so it's a very natural transition over into this new kind of genre of gaming.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when I wrote this long form report on crypto gaming, one of the main takeaways was TCGs, trading card games, are a very natural fit for Web3, and probably the only one that made sense at the time, and perhaps even still today. What I'm curious about is, how does one actually create from scratch a trading card game that lots of people like? I think that's the biggest risk, right? With regular games, the biggest risk is you spend 7 years building some really complex 3D world and like 2 people buy it. With trading card games, the creating the game itself probably is not nearly as challenging. But what you need is a bunch of people that want to play the actual TCG. And so you're almost shifting all of that to the very beginning when you're just designing the game, where you could actually prove it out without even making a virtual game. You could just prove it out with physical cards, right? But how does one start at that step and establish a brand new TCG?
Okay, so then I don't know how long we have in this conversation, but I've basically written an entire book on this subject. So
Yeah. Oh,
I'll
nice.
distill a few key principles, right? But
We'll include the link too in
y-
the show notes.
yeah, and I talk about it a ton for free on my own podcast, which we can also link to it of the steps of this because, but I'll give a couple key things. I don't want to like tease, like, at its core, game design in general is about what I call the core design loop, right? And this applies to any creative work, but it's fundamentally, you have some inspiration of an idea, like what's the unique selling point, what's the core of what I'm doing, why is this exciting, right? You create your frame around it. So step one is inspiration. Step two is framing. We're saying, okay, what's the box I'm going to play in, right? Much time and resources am I going to do this? Is this going to be a physical card game? Is it going to be an RPG? Is it going to right? What's the space I'm playing in? Then you brainstorm ideas for how that's going to work. And so you try to create as many ideas as possible and then filter that down into something that's like concrete and testable, which you then step four is prototyping. You prototype as cheaply and quickly as possible. Then step five is testing. You actually validate your ideas, because no matter how long you've been, I've been doing this 20 some odd years, I still have no idea if they're good until I actually test them, right? My instincts are a little better than they used to be, but you still have to test. And then step six is iterating. You take the lessons you learn from testing, go back to whatever step of the cycle you need to, right? Does the idea need work? Is it certain elements that were more fun than others and I need to change the frame, or, whatever it is. And you just circle through that as fast as possible. That is true regardless of the type of game you're working on. And I have found it is also true regardless of it. This is the way business works too, right? Same basic concepts of any kind of art, creative work, business. When it comes to a trading card game, you have to build the overall structure, what I call the engine of the game, right? Which is the basic rules, the basic function, like what space will these thousands or tens of thousands or millions of cards that I'm going to create live in? And it has to be robust enough to support this level of content creation and this level of discovery for players. So there's a lot more work that has to go in up front to build a system that can hold all of the puzzle pieces, all of the individual pieces you're going to create. And then, as you said, like, you want to test this physically, even if you're building a digital game, right? The first version of Solforge was a digital card game only, but we still prototyped and tested it physically. I think a lot of, even when you're testing really fancy big RPG systems, or you're trying to make the next World of Warcraft, whatever, if you can test any of that physically and or have a person pretend to be the computer, or test it in as cheaply as possible, like, you should always be doing that. And so that same principle applies here. And then from there, you hope you find something where you're like, okay, now I know that there's a core here that I want to develop. I pour more resources into it. That allows me to test with a wider audience. That allows me to validate my assumptions more. And then once I get to the point where, okay, people, not only, regular people that are in my target audience group, ask me to want to play this again, regardless of me just asking them, right, to play test it, that starts to give you a signal that says, yes, this is good enough. Now we're going to start working to build a real business and monetization around it. So I tried to give a medium length answer to you here, but there's a lot of things to unpack just to help whoever's listening kind of get a big picture understanding of what goes into this.
If you like Unlayered, check out the Solfate podcast with Nick and James. They talk shop with the builders and founders in crypto, focusing primarily on the Solana ecosystem. Solfate episodes dig deep into both the technical and personal aspects of what it's like to build new tools, protocols, and businesses in crypto. Search Solana Solfate in your podcast app, or go to solfate.com/podcast. Now back to the show.
Gotcha. No, that's super helpful context. And it does sound pretty similar to, I guess, the right way to figure out if, to your point, business or even any other game should be kind of iterating through all of these steps. So how did this come to be for Solforge? I understand it predates crypto gaming. So what did that process look like for starting that?
Yeah. So all right, I'll tell the first part of the story because it's fun. To zoom back in my personal history, right? I'd been a pro Magic player, changed the course of my life. I went and quit law school, became a game designer, worked for another company called Upper Deck, where I worked on major brands, then designed games for them. Eventually, I kind of came to this realization that I wanted to start my own business and do my own thing. I wasn't totally sure what that looked like, but I wanted to. I didn't want to work for anybody else, and I thought I could take a shot at this. And so I did. And the first game I released was a deck building game called Ascension, which started off as a tabletop game. People can download it for free on their mobile devices now and play, or it's on Steam, whatever. It's in VR now. It's all over the place. But I went to a conference in Seattle called PAX Dev, which is a developer conference there. And I went to go see Richard Garfield give a talk, right? I had given a talk earlier in the day. Richard Garfield's the guy that created Magic. He's the guy that changed the course of my life. Of course, I'm going to go listen to this guy talk. So he gives his talk, and I'm taking notes like everybody else in the room. And then there's a Q&A period afterwards, and somebody in the room asks, "What's his favorite game right now?" And he says, "Ascension, my game." And I literally like jump up I'm in the crowd, I jump up and just go woohoo,
No
like
way.
a child, like and everybody laughs and whatever. But it gave me my in, right? And so afterwards I say, "Hey, hi, I'm Justin, I designed Ascension." And we instantly started talking. We talked for like 3.5 hours. And it was
Wow.
very clear that we had the exact same vision for what we wanted to do next, and that was Solforge, right? And part of what was inspiring to us, I mean, let alone obviously for me, I'm giddy, and this is like dream come true. But what was inspiring to us is we both love to take the core principles of design and see what new technology brings to the table and how we can leverage that to create a new experience that's rewarding for our audience, right? And at the time, mobile gaming was brand new, right? There was, the games on phone and iPad, like this was just this was a new territory. There were no digital, were no digital trading card games. There was nothing to really like that was built with that in mind to start. And so we're like, okay, let's make Solforge. And that was that we had cards that like leveled up and evolved as you played them. And it was based on 5 lanes of combat, so it could fit on a phone screen well. And so we designed with the constraints of that space to build something that was really cool and fun. So that was a great experience. We crowdfunded it. We had it. We ran it for like 4 or 5 years in live operations. Had a really dedicated fan base. But unfortunately, at a certain point, the cost to kind of maintain the servers and maintain the game didn't make sense anymore, and we had to sunset the game, right? Now, this, for people that are game developers in the audience, this is going to sound common, right? Like this happens all the time. But it had never happened to me before, right? I had made games that we stopped producing, but when I make a tabletop game that we stopped producing, like you still own it, right? It's still there. But what happened the day we shut the servers off, everyone's collections disappeared overnight, right? Everything was gone. And people invest, we've talked about like people invest a lot of themselves in this. Not only do they invest the community, they invest dollars, they invest time, they invest like a part of their persona, right? I mean, people get tattoos of characters for my games, like this is like a legit part of who they are. And so that was so painful to me. It was the worst experience of my entire career, and took a while to recover from that, as a company financially. I mean, we almost went bankrupt. We went through a lot of hardship, but finally, when I was able to recover from that and was like, okay, look, I still believe in this game. I think it's the core of the game is great, but is there a way that we can have new technology that could bring this back in a new way that would help potentially solve that problem? And that's when I started talking to Richard about Solforge Fusion, right? And there's a couple convergent technologies that didn't exist back then that do exist now that helped us to make Solforge Fusion what it is. So I could describe a little bit of that here if you're open to it, to kind of get a sense of why we're in where we are, or I can pause if you got something else you want to dig into.
No, that makes complete sense. I mean, the only thing that, and maybe you're going to get into this just in a second, but when you said that when the server shut down and people lost their collections, I was like, wow, it would be great if these are all like NFTs or something or on chain. So even if the original developers stopped, like all that did is still public and one could recreate it. But maybe that's what you're already getting into. So let's just get into
you're
this next
exactly
part.
Right. You're exactly right. So there's a couple different divergent technologies here. So or convergent technologies, and one is digital printing technology has gotten to be pretty impressive now. Whereas traditionally when you're printing stuff, right, you create these print sheets and you have to print in very large volumes to make it make any economic sense at all. All right, and so that's where traditional trading card games, they will say a set of cards will have 300 cards in it, and then you'll buy a booster pack, which will have a random assortment of those cards, but it's still the same 300 cards. It's just randomly put into packs. With digital printing technology, we can actually algorithmically generate and print every single pack so it's unique and one of a kind, and that's exactly what we did with Solforge Fusion. So every single pack you buy is not just that you're going to have a random assortment of stuff, it's yours is only yours. No one will ever have the same one as you. And so we were able to release the physical version of the game back in 2022, where people could have a truly unique and limitless discoverability experience, right? Even more so than a traditional trading card game, where there's a lot of permutations, but you could collect every card. You could experience everything that's there. And typically what would happen in a traditional trading card game is, even though it's infinitely discoverable, in reality, what people would do is they'd go on the internet, they'd see what other people are playing, whatever the best decks are, people would all converge around that. And that is, unfortunate. It's just the reality of the internet age, right? When I first started playing Magic, there was the beginning days of the internet, and so it certainly didn't happen as fast. It didn't really happen that much at all. Now it's within a week or two of new cards getting released, everybody's kind of playing the same 3 or 4 decks, and that's just kind of how it converges. Whereas Solforge Fusion, you can't do that. We have it, every single deck's one of a kind. The way you build your deck is just shuffle any 2 decks together, so it's kind of, you get unique half decks. and you shuffle each deck together and go, which means it's both easier barrier to entry, so right, you don't have to worry about collecting a bunch of different cards, shuffle each decks together and go, and truly unique discoverability, right? You'll never have the same 2 decks, so you have to work with what you have, your opponent works with what they have, and everything you see is brand new. And that was very exciting. And of course, being able to scan all of those things into an online collection and then turn those into unique NFTs. So whether, if the game servers went down tomorrow, you would still have your physical copy of the game if you bought a physical copy, or if you bought a digital copy, the NFTs, well, they're not live yet, but they will be soon. So we're not, and so people can have that exist and have the game exist and own their assets. So like this was felt like a very perfect visceral example of like what's the real value of these things existing outside of a game server. What's the value of people really owning their objects over time? We could talk more about like what other ways you can decentralize and give more power to the community, because that stuff is very exciting to me. And I think that there's an interesting discussion to be had around what things should be decentralized, what things shouldn't be decentralized. But at its core, Solforge Fusion got to where it is today because I believed in a great game. I believe that the new technology opens up new doors to solve real problems for players and create new play experiences for them. And Solforge Fusion is trying to be the leader in creating that experience for players.
Super interesting. Can you, because I think I didn't fully understand the mechanic here. So are you saying it's impossible to collect everything? How does the actual card mechanism work in terms of uniqueness and what you end up playing with?
Right. So we use an algorithm to generate the cards that exist in the set. Some of them are designed more like a traditional trading card game. Some of them are designed via a kind of splicing algorithm. So if you're familiar with games like Diablo, where you'll have like an adjective noun combination for your gear, right? We do that with our cards. So you can have an arrogant worm and a ice yeti, and you could have an ice worm and an arrogant yeti, and that would create specific card sites, right? So that's one piece. So we have, we have over 30,000 unique possible cards based on our algorithm that exist today. So we're already more than 20 years of Magic in our first couple sets, right? And our new set we have a third set that's releasing on June 6th, which is then going to be even more exponentially greater. So that's one piece of it. But because what you buy as a pack, as a unit, is half of a deck, which is sort of 10 cards that all level up, that combination of 10 cards, there are more possible of those combinations than there are atoms in the universe. And so you will never get the same deck twice. And so those cards are always designed to work together. So those 10 cards always stay together. You can pick another set of 10 cards that's unique and shuffle those 2 decks together to play. So what we call fusing a deck. So you can fuse a deck, and then again, this can be done digitally in the app. This can be done physically, of course, by shuffling your cards together. And so there is a truly limitless amount of every NFT is a one of one. Every physical deck is a one of one. There is no way to ever have a duplicate, which is, I think, an exciting thing that nobody's ever done before.
Gotcha. Does that mechanic though make it increase the learning curve to like get acquainted with the game or understand if like you're good or not?
Yeah. So a couple of pieces, right? One of the reasons why, even though yes, those are challenges that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. That's part of why we use this like adjective noun system. So even though I use these big terms like 30,000 possible cards and more decks and atoms in the universe, in reality, you need to learn about 400 like adjectives and nouns and what they mean, and then that's it. You actually know all the things, right? So the person that wants to kind of grok what's going on and understand everything can do so without too much heavy lifting, but the number of different ways that those things can show up is functionally limitless. So and this is just another key principle of design, right? You want to make sure that the players can sort of understand what's happening, but you want enough innovation and discovery to keep people engaged, but you need it to be presented in such a way that people can feel like they understand and they feel their skill level improving. Because the second part of your question was, how long does it take for you to figure out if you're good at the game or, reach a given skill level? And that is, these kinds of games are infinitely deep on that front. Again, as playing at a world championship level, like there's always more to learn, always. And it's a funny trait around these games also that, to a certain extent, you want to obfuscate that lesson. If you play chess against somebody that's better than you, you're going to lose 100% of the time, right? They're just going to crush you again and again and again. But a game like poker, right? you could beat the world champion in a given hand, no problem, right? It can happen, and then that gives you both makes the game more fun and gives you a psychological out when you lose to say, I just got unlucky, right? I can blame something else besides my skill level. And so as a designer, I actually do want some of that obfuscation because it makes the game more fun. It makes people of different skill levels have more of a chance to play. So you want the better player to win. You want to have the ideal is that there's this steady ramp of skill and discovery, that you're consistently learning new things and getting better and seeing connections you didn't see before, but you don't want someone to look from where they are today. It's like imagining, if you're, I don't know what kinds of games you play, but if you're imagining, you're looking at a level 50 World of Warcraft character and you're starting off as level 1 and you try to understand everything that's happening for that level 50 player with all of their things, you're going to get completely blown out of the water. You have no idea what's going on. You want it to be a steady progression. So I try to design games so that you do have that like constant feeling of learning and growth, but that you're never, kind of fully, okay, I know for sure I'm player level 4 or whatever it is. You're gonna learn and continue to have challenges and have opportunities to beat players who are better than you and lose to players who are worse than you, but that their skill still has a big factor in the outcome of a game.
Right, less deterministic, more probabilistic. Introduces some randomness there, and it sounds like what you're describing. This phenomenon is this concept of being easy to learn, difficult to master, which is important, I think, to get new people in without kind of being too easy, such that people get bored.
Right. And it's a real challenge that comes from, being careful about audience capture. Right. And this is a big problem in a lot of Web3 gaming I see, where you see your core players who have a lot of the token, or who are have the most valuable NFTs, or at the top of the game, that they have a certain set of interests that make their lives better, that don't necessarily align with the interests of the new player. And I look at it as a pyramid, right? You've got your kind of people at the very top that are your kind of sharks and your whales and whatever, and you've got the people at the bottom that are your minnows, your new players, your user acquisition funnel. And you have to serve the bottom of the pyramid. If you make the top of the pyramid too much of your focus, the pyramid's going to topple over. And so it's really important to build the incentives correctly when you're doing that. So it's a lot of elements of design, I think, where people go off the rails and have gone off the rails with older Web3 games, where that ends up becoming just literally a pyramid scheme, and it collapses in on itself.
So, I mean, since we're on this topic, if you could, I know could probably be a 3-hour conversation, but is it possible if you could distill some of these core principles of good game design, or just good design in general?
Yeah, you're right. That is a 3-hour conversation. So let's start good game design in general. Let's start with, at the top level, player experience is the only metric that matters, right? At the end of the day, you need to come back to, is this creating the experience that you want for your audience, right? Is this something that's compelling for them? And knowing what that experience is and why it's compelling is absolutely critical. And so this is part of when you're going through the core design loop, your inspiration has to be that nugget, right? So it's like, what's different about your offering? What's going to draw people to it? What's exciting about it? And this is something I also refer to as the core tension of a game, which might sound unusual, because in fact, my favorite, it's traditionally hard to define what a game really is, right? I mean, Wittgenstein and there's been a lot of philosophical discussion specifically using games as an example of something that's very fuzzy. My favorite definition of a game is the voluntary acceptance of unnecessary obstacles. Because you're basically just choosing to do things in a way that's harder than it makes sense, right? Let's go back to the chess example and say, all right, your job is to capture the opponent's king. Okay, cool. I'm going to reach across the table. I'm going to grab the king. I got it. I did it, right? That is not fun. That is not a fun game. So we create all these bizarre rules like, okay, horses move this way and you can only do this thing. And, like that now creates constraints that frustrate the player in their goal, that now the possibility that I can overcome those constraints is the fun of play, right? And so when you're designing a great game, understanding what that core tension is, how am I intentionally frustrating my players, and how do I create proper releases for that tension, is at the core of good design. So a little bit of an counterintuitive way to think about how you're providing value. So that's one piece. Another principle is that your business model and your gameplay have to align. and this will kind of tie more broadly to be right that if you're building a game that is designed to be something that is continuously expanding and exploring, and there's a lot of things that people have to discover, maybe then that would be a reasonable place to have potentially a subscription model or a repeat purchase model. But if you have something where it's like, hey, this is a really fun experience, takes 20 minutes, and then you've kind of done everything, then trying to get people to buy additional packs of content or pay a monthly subscription fee is crazy, right? And it's actually, and a lot of, when you see micropayments games, every time you've seen a new business model show up for games, right, it's created this tension, right? This is, people hated subscriptions when they showed up, but it makes sense for something where you have an ongoing continuous event cycle and something like World of Warcraft. People hated micropayments when they showed up, and freemium games when they showed up. But it makes sense if you're going to have something that people have the ability to like buy a lot of individual content, and there's cool things to discover and plenty of content for them to go and explore. And then the same is true, I think, when you're dealing with things like tokenomics and NFTs and Web3, right? You really need to build something that makes sense for the business model that you're doing. And just to make it more concrete, like to me, I always think, okay, if I'm a player of this game, is it a no-brainer for me that I'm getting way more value than I'm paying, right? And making sure that it's always it should never even be a question how much joy you get relative to the kind of dollars in. And I think that's where a lot of people go off track. And that's kind of, moving from just pure design into the kind of business model and design. And then the last thing I'll speak to, and I could jump to any segment of this topic or a million more, is as you're designing a game, this speaks to what we talked about before about the kind of core design loop. But starting when you first are working on a game, you want to start with the big questions, and you want to move quickly and break things, right? You want to try, like, if something's not working, like double it or cut it in half, or like try removing entire systems and throwing in new systems, right? But don't spend a lot of time on the detail levels, right? I think about, don't care if this card is overpowered, or this effect doesn't make sense yet, or the numbers don't add up. Like, that stuff doesn't matter at first. And if you spend a ton of time, the way I look at it is like you're building a house, right? And if you don't want to be like worrying about the paint color and furniture arranging before you have a foundation built, right? You're just wasting a ton of time. And so being able to figure that part out early, and then over time you go through what I call the phases of design, where you'll move from, okay, where's the fun? What's happening here? All the way down to things like, okay, is this balanced? Is this developed well? Down to polish and making sure the art it fits and the flavor and everything all connects together. And so moving through those phases and knowing the right questions to ask at the right time is another key piece of good design.
Wow. So it sounds like you distilled a lot of wisdom into that answer, but
I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, man. I'll jump back to a story here, just because again, let me take you back, right? I was a pro player, which was basically I'm very analytical, right? I like to break things down into structures and break apart systems. And that was the same thing, made sense to go to law school. That's kind of what you do in law. You just how do I break these rules or turn these rules to my advantage. And then I quit law school to become a game designer. Now, that was actually terrifying, right? Like, when I think about game design, and maybe a lot of your audience are like this, is like, there are these creative geniuses out there that have some magical ability I never had. I never thought of myself as a creative person. Like, I felt like I was just pretending because I was good at playing games that I could like get this job designing games, but I had no idea what I was doing. And so I spent a lot of time, not just like reading every book I could on creativity, talking to a lot of great designers, like trying to understand how my analytical brain could be a quote unquote creative person, right? And it really did come down to just like, okay, no, there's literally step-by-step processes. There's nobody out there that has some magical creative secret sauce that you don't have. It's just some people have learned to follow this process, and a lot of them just did it unconsciously, but I had to make it conscious. I had to make it explicit because that's just how I think. And so I spent a lot of time thinking, okay, these are the principles. This is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And then now I try to teach that to other people because I know there are other people out there like me who would love to do this sort of thing, but think it's something they don't have or some skill they don't have. And it's just a process that you can practice and learn. And then the more recent version of this lesson for me has been what we talked about earlier, which is, oh, wow, it's not just game design. It's all creative work. It's all business. It's all these principles. It's the same process. It's the same thing. If you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, there is a step-by-step process to get from, I have no idea what I'm doing, to, okay, I have a validated, worthwhile thing that I can put out on the market and move forward with. So it's been a very interesting process to learn, and now trying to get better at communicating it in a way that helps to serve others.
How would you describe that process, if you could, that creative process, as you learned it, as someone who's analytical that wanted to get into a more creative field? What resonated with you?
Yeah, so that's what I described earlier. It's the core design loop is how I described it, right? So it's inspiration, framing, brainstorming, prototyping, testing, iterating, and that it's a step by step, right? The what's the core and the heart of what I'm trying to do? What's the box I'm going to play in? And putting a box around things is really important. It's a step a lot of people miss, right? Because it's like, oh, I'll make a cool game. Okay, where do I start? What do I do? There's like anything I could think of, right? But it's like, no, okay, make a game that you can prototype in 15 minutes with a deck of regular cards that you can play with your friends. Like, okay, got it. Now I'm suddenly in a box that I can manage, right? Or how much time and resources you're going to put into some new big project. Hey, I'm going to spend, like, even when I started my business, I wasn't consciously using it in this way at that time, but it was really important. Was I said, okay, I quit my job. I had saved up enough, a year's worth of living expenses before quitting my job. And I said, okay, if I can't make enough money to support myself in a year, I'm going to go find another job, right? And that was creating a frame around, okay, I've created here's what I have to be able to do. And that helps manage a business a lot better. Or when I'm trying a new project, I'm going to invest X amount of dollars and I need to see, Y retention rate or whatever return on that within Z time to be able to understand what I'm doing. Creating a frame is really important. And then, there's a specific process for brainstorming. And this is one that I can dig in deeper, but I actually worked on this with the Wharton School of Business. We created a whole system that we've used to work with major companies like Google and Zillow and Twitter, or X now, I guess, but it was Twitter when we worked with them, on how to better brainstorm and ideate as a team. Because as it turns out, you put a lot of smart people into a room, and they get dumber. It is amazing how much smart people in the same room will suppress each other's ideas and automatically move towards the loudest person in the room, and a bunch of stuff that you want to protect against. And then, prototyping, I already mentioned. Simple, keep it simple, stupid, like as cheaply and quickly as possible. You want to validate your ideas, be like a scientist testing a hypothesis, how you take in feedback and test, and then just learn from that and go back. And like, that's the simplest version of this. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances to unpack. There's a lot of different layers, but like, if I were going to give like the one core lesson, is just follow that core design loop process to bring anything from kind of core, big idea or no idea to something that you can actually be, do real creative work.
Very cool. Yeah. So it sounds like this, regardless of the context, whether it's game design or just life in general, it's a very repeatable, reusable framework that seems like it could help a lot of people just get unstuck and generate really interesting ideas pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've definitely found that, and I've now taught it to enough people and seen enough people react to it that I have very high confidence. And I mean, and again, I part of what I do on my podcast is I talk to great designers and now people from a variety of different walks of life. We're, Grammy Award nominated DJs and, New York Times bestselling authors, and, as well as people from around the game industry. And they all have the same process. They may use different words. They may have like slight variations, but this is not, I didn't invent this. I just articulated it. Everybody uses this. This is not a new thing. It was new to me when I discovered it, but it's not, it's a process that just works.
That sounds like it. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk a bit about the current state and I guess the future state as well of Solforge Fusion. How big's the team? What's the main area of focus? It sounds like the NFTs are right on the horizon here. You mentioned June 6th as the date.
Well, so June 6th is the date for our next major content release. It's not the date for the NFTs. So,
okay.
Excuse me. So, all right. So I'll give you the brief history timeline and now where the focus is. So we launched the first tabletop version of the game October 2022. We launched the first, and those all had, all the algorithmically generated decks with QR codes you could scan at your online account, but you couldn't really do anything with those. We launched the digital version of the game in early access on Steam in April, so just last month. And so now there's a Web2 version of the game that people can play, and there's a tabletop version, and they link, right? So you can scan your physical decks in the online account. You can also buy natively digital decks, and eventually we will have a feature that allows you to print those if you want to print them physically. That will come next year. But our main focus right now is to be able to create the Web3 integration to this. There's a lot of features we're adding in, more, in-app quests and events and cool stuff to do. Like we also built, I don't think I mentioned this before, in addition to playing like a traditional trading card game where you can battle against other people online or battle against an AI, we have a roguelite campaign mode, which means it's algorithmically generated campaign where you take your one-of-a-kind deck, bring it into this custom-generated campaign, and level it up, gain XP, gain new powers, battle bosses who have their own unique powers. So there's this whole other experience that you can have. That's all live today. But we have lots of extra little bells and whistles we're adding to it. But bringing it to Web3, our plan is to do a token airdrop to all of our players. So anybody that's, and to have and some other key communities to launch the NFTs in parallel with that. So you could use the Solforge token to mint the NFTs from any deck in your collection. And then to be able to, over time, add more features and functionality to the Web3 elements so that we'll have players, we have a player-controlled community fund that will work for managing tournaments and giving out rewards and helping to incentivize new projects and all of that, which is stuff that I'm very excited about. So continuing, we have a new, we do what we call set releases, right? New content releases of a bunch of new cards. We did one in 2022. We did one in 2023. Our new one that's coming in 2024 is the thing that's launching on June 6th. So it's called The Last Winter. And there's actually a really cool storyline that goes with this. Anybody that wants to can go to solforgefusion.com, click on story. And not only do we have some, cool animated things to tell you the story, but players actually participate in and influence the story. So we have storyline events that happen a couple times a year. And the players who participate in it will actually change the course of the events in the world of Solforge. And they will not only, and that changes which cards are available in future sets, but also we actually have writers who will do custom storylines. If you participate in one of these story events and have a big moment happen, our writers will write a custom story that becomes attached to your deck permanently. So it becomes part of the NFT, part of the collection of the deck, that it now has a story blurb associated with it, in addition to its records of performance and everything. So it makes it even more like fun and collectible and connects to the broader world of what we're doing. So that's another piece that's exciting that we're continuing to build on. And so, yeah, I feel like I've said a lot of things, but, I think you asked about team size. We're about 14 people, full time, working on all of the different aspects of the game, including supporting the physical and digital and Web3 elements.
Amazing. Yeah, I didn't realize how young the game was. It's 2022 to today. Very impressive. And how big is the community of players? And how did you even kind of bootstrap that community?
Yeah. I mean, we have thousands of players. We have about, 100 to 200 daily active players on the digital app a day. And so it's a, small from a traditional Web 2 aspect, pretty decently sized from a Web 3 aspect. We have a lot more players that play the tabletop game. And so that was that was part of the bootstrap strategy, to be honest, is say, hey, look, first of all, we have players of the original Solforge who, still have fond memories of the game that have come back. We have people who have followed me and, my games over the years. Of course, Richard Garfield, it carries a lot of weight. So we had a lot of people that knew us as designers and were willing to give us a shot. And then we launched the physical game as a kind of way to get in front of people, get people excited, to validate that there's an audience. And it wasn't, we weren't 100% committed to getting the full digital game done until after we saw enough audience and enough excitement from the tabletop game. And so in many ways, it was kind of a great process. All right, let's launch this tabletop game. All right, people love that. Great. We'll use that to launch digital game. Great. People love that. Let's use that. Now we'll launch the Web3 elements. And so everything kind of feeds in. We have a white paper about this, but the idea is that there's 3 pillars that all stand alone and all support the overall kind of Solforge Fusion house, right? You can play the tabletop game and pretend there's no digital aspect and you're fine. You can play the Web 2 thing, never touch the tabletop, never touch Web 3, you're fine. You could be fully engaged in the Web 3 elements and excited about all the collectibles. Or you could do all of those things and they all feed each other. And so, and the heart of it, like I said, from I think early on, is it's you have to have a great game, number one. And that was what we used the tabletop version of the game to validate in the original version of Solforge. And then you have to build a great community around that. And from there, you can take things a lot of different directions, but that's at the heart of what supports this, regardless of which platform you choose to play on.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's pretty unique too. I don't see many other games that support pure physical version of it. One that doesn't require anything related to crypto. Then obviously one could take the crypto side as far as they want to. which to me, that was a core thesis when I wrote that giant piece on gaming, which is the game itself has to be fun and not really need crypto at all, to be honest, before it makes sense to try to introduce some of those primitives. And I feel like the inverse always happens where, I don't know, someone launches some NFT collection, then they tries to fit some game on top of it or bolt it on. It's like, that's a little bit hard to do.
Right. That's right. And there's a lot of failed examples of that out there, right? And it's that's natural, right? Anytime there's a new technology in a new field, people are going to try to, get excited about it and run down different paths. But listen, if you're going to get into the world of gaming, got to be a fun game. Nothing will survive if it's not a fun game. So it's a, not a radical thesis, but but a really important one that a lot of people forget. And also, it's sort of like people talk about writing a book in the same way they talk about designing games, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm going to write a book about that. I could do that. I could write a game. I could design a game, right? And it's like, truth is, it's not easy, right? It's like, I could define for you the process. The process is not complicated, but the work of doing it is hard, right? The iterative work is hard. The, training your instincts over time is hard. Dealing with feedback and knowing how to react to that feedback is hard. Like there's an expertise here that I think people gloss over, right? It's funny. They don't do this with movies, right? If somebody makes the Matrix or whatever, they're like, oh, I could have done that, right? Because the people understand that's like, there's a lot that goes into that. But for some reason, things like books and games, anybody thinks they can do, which is, you can do it, but can you do it well? That takes a lifetime. That takes a lot of skill.
Yeah, it's very hard. But the rewards are also equally as massive, with games generating more revenue than movies and music and some other industry combined. It's a huge growing industry for sure, especially on mobile. That's growing really quickly. And I guess the thesis we're both taking here is that crypto will also drive a lot of new value as well into the gaming industry. So kind of the final topic I want to touch on for today is your read on the current state of gaming, crypto gaming specifically. Are there any projects that you've seen that you like or you think are doing things in a novel way that perhaps could be a source of inspiration?
I think that there is a lot of, obviously I'm keeping an eye mostly on a lot of the, the digital TCG space and seeing things like Parallel, and Gods Unchained and a lot of the other ones that have been there to see kind of where they are with this. I think that the biggest challenge that the industry faces right now is there is such a negative backlash, some of which is justified, right, from the Web2 and classic gaming community, because a lot of these projects were, frankly, just pretty clear money grabs or not well thought through, games and executions. And so there was this like brief spike in interest and everybody was going to put an NFT into every game and everybody's going to tokenize everything. And then people realized very quickly that was not a good idea. And it was, it didn't add value to the players, right? It wasn't creating a great experience. And now the question is, how do you get people back on board? Because if it's just the Web3 community as it stands, the numbers are so small relative to, traditional gaming. It's kind of laughable, right? And so how do you bring those audiences over in a way that's interesting and a way that shows that value? And this is where we're trying to be a leader in that, right? And part of that is this, show the value first, also make it opt-in, and solve the UI UX problem, right? Like right now I have to get a wallet and connect a wallet and do a thing and build it. It's just so cumbersome. And the gaming industry in particular has been, in part because there's so much money in it, right? It's evolved like, the UI UX of mobile games and the way that you flow into this is like, it's really smooth and really slick and way higher standards than probably anything else out there, right? And certainly traditional, web apps and finance apps and things that, more Web3 community is familiar with. So I think the core are those problems, and I haven't seen someone that's solved those problems well yet. I'm trying to be that person, and I'm eager. Actually, would love to turn the question back to you if there's people that you see that you think are doing a good job of solving those core issues that cross over into really making Web3 grow. Because I think it's going to happen. It's just a question of who's leading the charge.
Yeah, I mean, So the way I view this space is from the perspective of, I'm an application builder first and foremost. So I'm not necessarily building a game, but hitting a lot of the same issues that game developers hit, which is you already mentioned some of them, right? It's custody, it's how to do wallets, it's how to make the UX really smooth. So to me, people are solving that. Just the emergence of embedded wallets, what Coinbase has done with smart wallets, to me feels like a much better solution than having them bring their own and connect it, right? That's the death of any app, is the words connect wallet. No one's really going to go through the work to do all of that unless there's some massive, massive financial upside there. Right? PempFun is kind of the exception to this rule, where they are getting people to do that because it's essentially a lottery ticket into a meme coin. From what I hear in the rumor mill, the console manufacturers are working on wallets that would enable people to have digital assets on the consoles themselves. I don't know if there's any truth to it or not. I feel like there is, because it's really not that hard to build. They have a lot of money.
Well, yeah,
But-
you have
but
to
yeah,
look
I
at the incentive structures for these things, right? Like, I actually think the big players are the least incentivized to play in this space right now, right? Because if I can keep you in my walled garden, right? So I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here because I think it's interesting,
yeah.
right? They like at a high level, right? Like, the sort of crypto space is trying to solve a trust problem, right? That's what the technology is designed to do. It's saying, hey, all right, I don't know that I can trust you, and so I'm going to use this technology to ensure that we can trust each other and have exchanges. This is absolutely critical in the world of finance, right? Absolutely critical. This is like the main thing. We pay trillions and trillions of dollars to banks and institutions to sort of middleman this trust for us, and for well, we don't have to get into why problems with that, but so if we can remove that, there's trillions of dollars at stake, and trust is really important. When it comes to trusting game companies, it's not that big a problem right now, right? People don't so much have an issue trusting these big companies with their currencies, with their game stuff, with their things to live on their servers, right? It's just not, it's not a visceral problem for players, because a company like a Blizzard or a Microsoft or whatever, their interest in yours align enough, right, to that you don't usually have to worry. Now, sometimes they will screw you over, right? Sometimes they will deflate your currency massively. Sometimes they will shut down your account. Sometimes they will do these things, and they will not necessarily let you have as much freedom as you might like to sell and trade and do your stuff. But it doesn't feel like a big problem. And for them, they get all the upside, right? They get to be the bank. They get to have full control. They get to have everything. And so they don't want to solve a problem that players aren't actively clamoring to have them solve. And so I think you have to have a clearly demonstrated groundswell of support / aggressive competitor that will force them to take those changes. Whereas somebody like me, who's more of an independent developer and who's more small, right? For me, I looked into doing this all on a private server. I looked into having all the same functions, because you can absolutely mirror every piece of functionality that you're getting from functionally every piece of functionality you're getting from using blockchain with a classic kind of server structure. But it is very expensive. It's a cost a lot to maintain. The legal implications and maintenance are very tough. There was the cost to do it as a developer was high, and being able to use blockchain technology to do that actually made this better for me as a developer, and presumably will allow for more discovery and more transferability. Once people are on the chain, they can just come over and move on to it and try our games. And so I think the innovations are going to come from smaller developers and smaller communities that can use this to leverage both the tech that exists as well as the communities that exist to grow. And it's only once some of those start to really take big bites of the apple and the big players start to feel threatened, they'll be forced to participate. But I would be shocked if they really innovated here.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess, you're probably biased, right? But is your view that the first game to do this at scale for mainstream audience is probably going to be a TCG, just because of it's a much clear value prop to put that on chain, the cards, versus, the next Fortnite somehow having the skins on chain, which there's just a lot more things that have to go right for something like that to happen. How do you view that?
Yeah. There's a really smart, fancy word that if I could remember it, I would sound smart and fancy. But the principle is that, whenever new technology gets adopted, what we do first is we take the thing we already know and we just port it over to the new technology. There,
Yeah.
And
Skeuomorphism or something like that.
Thank you. Yes, skeuomorphism.
Yeah.
There's the smart word. You get to be the smart one here. Skeuomorphism, right? And so what happens is when you first start making movies, they just start using the same stage direction as they did with plays and now putting it on screen, right? And then until they start realizing, oh, no, wait, we can do close-ups and we can do these different kinds of fade-ins. And so it takes a while for you to start to understand what's possible in movies. And we just started with plays and the same with, audio, every format. And so the same, I think, is going to be true here, right? When the fact that you have a file folder system on your desktop still, right, is kind of hilarious, right? It's just like, okay,
Yeah.
well, we don't actually use files and folders, but that's how we learned it. And so TCGs are the easiest to understand skeuomorphic thing from I own my game piece collectible and I can sell it and trade it and use it and it gives me functionality while I have it. And so it's the easiest thing to bring a mass market audience over from things they understand and see the value of. And so I do believe, despite my personal bias being a TCG guy, that it clearly makes the most sense as the thing that will help people cross over. And then, from there, I think it can open up to a lot more doors, of course.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it. That's actually how I described NFTs to people for the longest time, is like, hey, look, they're just like trading cards or baseball cards or what have you. So that makes a ton of sense. So we covered a lot of topics, ton of wisdom I've gleaned just from listening to you. And I think I'm going to check out some of the other materials you mentioned, your show, as well as I think you mentioned you've written a book on some of these topics too. So super appreciate that. We'll put that in the notes. Is there any closing thoughts you want to end this conversation with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I love having these kinds of conversations. I probably has come through the process here where I wrote both the book and the podcast are called Think Like a Game Designer. And it's, just through the conversations I love to have. And I just decided to start sharing them with the world. And so I would encourage people to share the conversation back with me. If this is something that's exciting to you, you can, we have a Discord, Stoneblade Discord that you can join. You can find me on X at, just search my name and it's easy to find. I love having these conversations and I love pushback too, right? I mean, one of the things, even our community, right, which is we have built a lot of trust with, had a lot of concerns and questions when we said we're going to move into Web3 and NFTs, right? And we were able to have that debate and discussion, which both refined, sometimes some things I was able to clear up their fears because they were misinformed. And other times they were able to help better inform me and saying, okay, you know what, these are things we really need to put more thought into and make sure, like the account security becomes obviously a lot more important when people have to manage their own wallets and what happens and things like that. And so I love having this kind of back and forth and what this, we didn't really talk that much about this next frontier of, decentralization and the aspects of what aspects should a community control and what aspects should be controlled by, a core team on core designers. And, we don't necessarily have time for that here, but I'd love to follow up and have people, they can check out our white paper and come chat with us. I love this kind of thing, regardless of how the outcome is. We're all playing on this frontier of design and creation, and that's exactly where I want to live.
Amazing. Well, super appreciate you taking the time with us, Justin, allowing us to also think like a game designer just for an hour. And would definitely love to have you come back and we can dive into any of those other topics that you mentioned, because there is a ton to unpack. It's hard to fit in one clean show. But I think gaming is going to be one of the most important kind of verticals through which the world works, being crypto.
Yes, sir. Now, next time I'll leave a seed. I'll tell you why my theory is not only that gaming will actually be the way that the entire world is going to work as the convergence of crypto and AI start to move forward, but I'll save that as a teaser for our next chat.
Amazing.